Going to? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'd like to get started with this great program that we have in store for you. My name is Susan LaPerla, and on behalf of the Ferguson Library, I do like welcoming you to this very special program. Today, we have the unique opportunity to work with and learn from a renowned expert in civic discourse and public dialogue, Richard Harwood, founder of the Harwood Institute. Home of the Public Innovators Lab, the Harwood Institute, with Rich at the helm, has been working with communities since 1988 to enable each one to become a place where everyone can come together amid differences and solve the complex challenges that affect us all. The success of this effort starts with leadership. And so I would like to introduce the chair of the Ferguson Library Board of Trustees, Stephanie O'Shea, who has a long history of community involvement herself and who shares our commitment to making Stamford a better place for all who call it home. Thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Yeah, I heard leadership. I was like, who's she talking about? That was very sweet of you. Thank you, Susan. And thank you to all of you here who came out this afternoon. It's such a beautiful day. And for everyone who's online listening, I think this is going to be such a interesting to hear, so interesting to hear what Mr. Harwood has to say. And I want to thank Bridget Fox and Matt Canones and Alice, who really worked so hard to get you here. And I learned today that Alice was the first person who really reached out to your group to get the conversation started here in Stamford. And then now they've gone all across the country. So I can't wait to read more. I downloaded your great work, but thank you for giving it to me already printed. I work for a publisher and I prefer printed books. I would encourage you all to do that. But anyway, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce someone who is very supportive of Stamford for 8 years as our state rep, my personal state rep. She did so much to help us. And now as our new mayor, she's going to continue to work so hard for Stamford. And this conversation is just the beginning. Here's our new mayor, Caroline Simmons.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So grateful for all of your leadership and to the whole Ferguson Library team here. Thank you for hosting this discussion today and for all you do to bring us together in our community to host discussions like this that are so powerful. And speaking of civic engagement, Stephanie, can't say enough amazing things about everything you do for our community, for our schools. I think when I first got involved in politics, you were out there at the polls. You've been such a devoted community member. We're so lucky to have you. And just so delighted to have Rich Harwood and the Harwood Institute here with us today. We are incredibly lucky to have them and their incredible team here today. Many of you have probably read about Rich's background, but they've been advocating for civic dialogue and change across the country and really across the world. They've worked in every single state and dozens of countries around the world. He's an author, speaker, innovator who's invested his career in revitalizing our country's hardest hit communities and helping to bring together communities to try to reduce polarization and bolster civic engagement in our country. And there's nothing more important than civic engagement. It's integral to our democracy, to having a healthy, thriving community. And there's so many benefits to it, not just to our community, but also to you all as individuals. There's so many benefits of being engaged civically, to mental health, to happiness levels, to your sense of connection and belonging in a community, and to actually being able to work together and effectuate change in a meaningful way and to make progress. And while we all know this is so important, unfortunately, trust in government and polarization is at an all-time high. Sorry, trust in government is low, but polarization is at an all-time high. A May 2021 Pew Research Center poll found that only 22% of Americans trust the government. And I know that that's declined significantly over the years. This is really a disheartening statistic, but tonight we really have an opportunity to change this and to work together to try to make things better. And I think especially the past couple of years, we've all felt that sense of isolation from each other in our community. And a lot of us have lost that connection to purpose. And so it's really important that we do this work now coming out of this pandemic, but also to change those statistics that we're seeing nationally and to try to improve people's trust in government. I know that for our new administration, this is something we are all so excited about. One of our goals is to make our government more responsive, to better listen to residents. And I want to just take a moment to recognize our incredible team here today. Bridget Fox, Chief of Staff for the City of Stamford, Janine Freeman and Aaron Miller, our leads for community engagement for the City of Stamford. I'm so grateful to have such an amazing team helping us do this work. Janine and Aaron have been out. We've been talking about revitalizing the West Main Street Bridge and improving our neighborhoods. They've been out almost daily talking to residents, knocking on doors and doing that work on the ground, which is so meaningful. And I think that's one of the most inspiring things about local government is that you can really touch people directly and hear from residents directly. And so we're excited to continue that work. We've launched a series of citizen service hubs. We're aiming to get to every single neighborhood. So if we haven't been to your neighborhood, we're aiming to get there soon. We also send out weekly newsletters and we're working to get our messages out on social media, but we really would love to hear from you. If you have an idea or a suggestion or something that we could do to better serve you and your family, please reach out to our office directly at mayor's office at stanfordct.gov. You can also let us know about issues in your community through our Fix It Stanford system, which we're also working to revamp and make work better for you all. But whether it's a pothole or a street lamp issue or something bigger like a mental health issue, we want to hear from you. And finally, I'll just say there's so many ways to get involved in city government. You can come testify or advocate in front of our boards, our Board of Education, our Board of Finance, our Board of Representatives, our zoning board. There's many ways to make your voices heard. You can serve on our board. So I want to make a pitch to all of you today. We're trying to recruit more people to serve on our boards and commissions. We have a number of openings, so feel free to reach out to Bridget, Janine, Aaron, or any of us today if you're interested. And we also want to have more diversity on our boards, to have people that look like the wonderful city that we have here. We have people that speak over 70 different languages in our city who come from all over the world. It's one of our greatest assets and strengths. And our goal, in a representative democracy, is to make sure that our government looks like the people that it serves. So let us know if you're interested. And finally, I just wanted to end with a quote that I've always found inspiring. So my parents have often told me and my siblings stories about the 1960s and how, as they described it to me, the world was on fire at the time with the women's liberation movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and so many different causes and movements for social justice. And they were inspired by President Kennedy's call to action in his inaugural address when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And I think that's the message I want to leave for you here tonight. And to borrow from President Kennedy's words, ask not what the city can do for you, ask what you can do for the city. And there's so many ways to get involved, and all of you bring so much talent to our city. And we're so grateful for you for being here tonight, for being interested in enhancing civic engagement, for lending your voice tonight, and for all you do for our community. We look forward to partnering with you and really looking forward to the discussion tonight. So thank you, Rich.
Well, hello. Now I want to move to Stanford. It is great to be with everyone here today, and I'm really delighted to be here and very grateful that the mayor took the time out of your busy schedule. I just learned that the mayor has 3 young children, as you probably all know, including a newborn. And so thank you. So you could be at home right now, if not at work, but you're here. And thank you so much. And to Stephanie, thank you so much for your leadership of this library. And to Alice, who I suspect is listening in, let me say this. There are well over 1,000 public libraries all across America using our work. And I get to meet a lot of chief executive officers of libraries and directors of libraries. And I can say this really confidently. It's not just because I'm standing here, but Alice Knapp is one of the very best leaders of public libraries in all of the United States. And so just a round of applause for her. So I want to talk about healing and hope. Healing and hope, something that as I've been traveling across the country, I'm sensing that people want to hear about and talk about and engage on. I suspect here in Connecticut, there are many folks who want to talk about healing and hope. And I suspect here in Stamford, there are many people who are concerned about this. Over the last few years, we have suffered as a nation and as people This pandemic has wreaked havoc on our lives, on our jobs, on our families, the sense of isolation and loneliness that so many of us have felt. 1 million people, think about it, over 1 million Americans, more people than if you totaled up all the folks who lived in all the major cities in Connecticut. More than all the major cities in Connecticut. If you just wiped them out, we would still have more people who have died from COVID in the last 3 years. It's an amazing statistic and a painful one. We have had an on and off again reckoning with systemic racism in our country over the last few years. Way too late, but still on and off. We are watching every night on television the invasion of a sovereign nation of Ukraine, going through a horrendous and horrific and terrifying war, and having to watch it unfold. And just days ago, we had to watch a hate crime yet again on our land in Buffalo, where people were gunned down. And let's call it what it was. It was domestic terrorism, right? Domestic terrorism. We had to watch it again. We have suffered over these last 3 years. I don't know about those of you here, but I know in talking to folks across the country that so many of us, and some of you have come into this room today tired and fatigued from what's happening in our lives. Some of you may have come into this room worried and worn out and worn down by what's been happening. Some of you may have come into this room feeling as though change is not happening fast enough in our country, particularly in the last few years. I've had people tell me just last week, people who have been engaged in change in their communities for decades say, I have had it. And I'm about to turn my back and walk away because I don't see the change happening in our communities that we so deserve. What I'm concerned about is how is it that we can move forward? How is it that we can create a society that is more equitable, more fair, more just, more inclusive, and more hopeful, not just for some of us, but for all of us? How is it that in this country, in this day and age today, we can ensure that every single individual here in Stamford can fulfill their God-given potential? And that every one of us, regardless of the color of our skin or our heritage or the native language we speak, or the God we pray to, if we pray to any God, that each and every one of us can be co-creators in America's promise moving forward. How is it that we can ensure that? Now, there are some in our country, most people in our country, who say that that's impossible today, that we are too polarized, right? That it is not possible to create the change that we want. It is not possible to create the change that we want. I have come to believe that that is an explanation and an excuse for inaction. An explanation and an excuse for inaction. We can do this. We can do this. I spent over the last year, and Stamford was one of the first communities to step forward with Alice Knapp's leadership and Bridget's help and Matt's help, talking to folks all across the country. And here's what I learned, and the mayor and I were just talking about this briefly. If I gave you all the transcripts from all those conversations, 16 of them, folks from Stamford to Western Kansas, where there isn't even a street light in the town where we talk to folks, in the local diner, to folks in Houston, in New Orleans, in Eugene, Oregon, in Spartanburg, South Carolina, one of the most conservative counties and communities in all of America. We talked to folks all over the country. If you took the transcripts, if I sent you the transcripts, God forbid, and asked you to read them, and I took off all the names of the communities where those transcripts were from, and I took off all the references to local communities that people made, I'm here to say that you could not tell the difference from one transcript to the next, or from one community to the next. You would see verbatim comments from one place like Western Kansas being exactly the same as Houston, Texas, and New Orleans, and Spartanburg, and Eugene, and the Fresno conversation we did in all Spanish. They would be exactly the same. Exactly the same. But here's what people told us. The challenges that we face in our country, while they're not about polarization, they are more dangerous, they are more perilous, and they are more troubling to our civic health and to our democracy. They're also more actionable than polarization, which is the good news. Here's what they said, 3 quick things. 1, we are separating and segregating from one another in our country due to the unrelenting fear and anxiety that is gripping our lives and gripping this nation. We are segregating and separating from one another. 2, our politicians, notwithstanding the ones here today, our politicians, the news media, and the effects from social media are intentionally manufacturing, and I use these words carefully, intentionally manufacturing and stoking polarization for their own political gain, to gain media share, and to get eyeballs on social media. And what this is doing is creating an alternate reality for people in their lives, where people cannot tell what is true and what is untrue, what is real and what is unreal, who to trust and who not to trust. It's just one big confusion. And this confusion has led to people becoming increasingly destabilized, not just about politics, which is bad enough, but in their personal lives, they told us. They are destabilized and disoriented. And it's getting worse, not better. And then lastly, people are engaged or having a natural human response, which is things are so confusing, so destabilizing, so disoriented, that folks are in a fight or flight mode. A fight or flight mode. It's not polarization, it's fight or flight. When we get afraid enough, when we get scared enough, we have 1 of 2 or 3 choices. We can fight, we can flee, some of us freeze. But what we heard over and over again, and this is not a term that I introduced, it's a term that was introduced in almost every conversation by more than one person who described the country as in a fight or flight grip. And the fight, well, we are joining increasingly smaller and smaller groups, often on social media, where we go down rabbit holes and end up at hate groups, where we believe there can be a sense of belonging, a sense of validation, a sense of acceptance from others, a sense that I am part of some community, at least no matter how small it is, at least it's a community I can belong to and someone will accept me. And look what it's doing to our country. Look what it's doing to our country. Or people flee altogether and disengage. They throw up their hands and walk away and say it's not worth it. Because if I come out and say anything, someone's going to clobber me. If I come out and say anything, someone's going to cut me off at the knees. If I come out and say something, someone's going to make some assumption about me based on the t-shirt I'm wearing, the hat I'm wearing, the color of my skin, my faith, whatever it is that by which someone can make a quick judgment about whether they can trust us or fear us, and whether or not they're going to fight us or embrace us. And it's an instantaneous judgment that we're making about one another now. How in God's name can we run a democracy this way? Here in Stanford, I understand one of the sayings is, this is a city that works. The question for us here in Stanford is, will this city work for everyone? Will it work for everyone? How can it work for everyone if we're in a fight or flight mode? If we can't tell what is real and what is unreal, or we can't figure out who to trust and who not to trust? It's not possible. I think the fundamental question is, how are we going to move forward? And here's the best analogy I can give you, the best way to imagine what's happening. Remember when you were a kid and you went into a house of mirrors? Did you ever go into a house of mirrors? I hated those. But it's worse today. Think about it. It's as if we're all in a house of mirrors and we know there's a doorway out. And we're scurrying around. We're running as fast as we possibly can to find the door. And there is no way to find the door. We know it exists, but we can't find it. And I don't know about you, but one of the worst feelings that you can possibly have as a human being is the feeling of being trapped, right? The feeling of being trapped. I'm sure we've all had that at different points in our lives. And there's nothing worse than it. But that's where America is today, trapped in a house of mirrors, knowing that there is a doorway out and believing, and I think with good reason, that folks are intentionally steering them away from where the door is so that they can gain themselves, whether it's politically, financially, or otherwise. Our challenge is not polarization. Our challenge is more psychological and social, as the mayor said, about connection and belonging and acceptance and validation. We can do something about this, but we have to ask ourselves the question, what kind of country do we want? Who as Americans do we want to become? Are we willing to have everyone come along or just some of us? Is that good enough? Is that good enough? I believe increasingly, I've come to believe that those of us who care about this country, those of us who love this country, those of us who still believe in patriotism, that means a love of country, a devotion to country. It's time to rise up and push back and to come into the public realm and engage with one another and demonstrate there's a different way to move forward in our communities and our country. Now, I have hope about this, not because I read it in a book or even that I wrote a book about it. So by God, I hope you buy as many books from me as you possibly can. My mother can't be the only one in America buying them. But I have hope that we can move forward. Let me just give you a few quick examples. Reading, Pennsylvania, where we're doing work right now. 10 years ago, it was declared the poorest city in America. 10 or 20 years ago, it was all white. Today, 70% Latinx. And for those folks, when I always say this, who believe that it's a homogeneous community, it's folks from 6 or 7 different countries with different dialects, different heritage, different histories, different customs. It's quite diverse. It's quite diverse. We've worked on helping them develop a community-led, community-driven educational agenda around equity. And they did it. And they did it. And you know what? They did it at the very same time that our country was in the grips of debates about critical race theory. They did it at the very same time that people are banning books in schools and libraries. They did it at the very same time that school boards have been overtaken, both from the left and the right, and people have been pushed out from school boards. They did it while we had debates over masks and whether or not kids should be wearing them anymore, if at all. They created an equity agenda that said that every child deserves a real opportunity. Then we need to ensure that every child and young person has mental health supports, that every person has after school and outer school supports, that there are teachers who look like the community, that we need a reallocation of resources across our schools to make sure that they're equitably distributed. They did it at the very same time these debates were going on. They created a shared agenda rooted in collective action to move forward. Now, they believed that this work was so important. We were funded initially by a national funder. They asked the national funder to go away. And 3 funders stepped forward to provide the largest grants they've ever made to support this work moving forward, to support a collective action movement. Now, if you think Reading is an aberration, the exception, the very same thing happened when we were working with folks in Lexington, Kentucky. The very same thing, different challenges, different community, different folks. They produced their own shared agenda for moving forward around equity. And if you think Lexington's an aberration or exception, it happened in Clarksville, Tennessee as well. One of the fastest growing communities in America, one that probably has some similar challenges to Stamford, Connecticut, right? It happened there as well. So we can come together and transcend these differences. And we have real differences in this country, which is different than being polarized. But we can transcend them and we can come together around issues we care about under the right conditions, Another example, Clark County, Kentucky, where we're also working, rural community, a community that's looking backwards for its future, a community that believes that The best times are behind them. When we started working there, we couldn't find people to work with. Like a lot of communities, I don't know if this isn't true here, but they're suffering from an opioid and meth challenge. Other communities are suffering from fentanyl challenges, right? And on it goes. What happened there, as what happens in a lot of communities that we work with, is someone overdoses on drugs, on meth or opioids. They get sent to the ER. The doctors and nurses take them in, they detox them, and then they move them out. And then what happens? We repeat it again. There's no hope in that. There's no prospect of turning your life around. So two women, they weren't doctors, they weren't nurses, they'd never worked in a medical facility before, went to a conference and came back with the idea that we ought to have coaches in our community, people who themselves had suffered from drug addiction. And when someone ends up at the ER, we're going to go meet them. And when we meet them at the ER, we're going to show empathy, not judgment. And when we engage with them, we're going to follow them out the door when they're detoxed. And we're going to make sure they get into drug treatment. And when they get into drug treatment, we're going to make sure we follow them all the way through drug treatment. And when they come out of drug treatment, we're going to make sure that they have job training and financial literacy and an ability to find a job. And when we do that, we're going to make sure they're connected to a social network, because we know in drug addiction and mental health and loneliness and other issues, your social network is as important as your medical care. We all know that. We all know that. These two women have been so successful, their drug abuse rate in this county is way down. People's ability to find jobs and create a lives for themselves is way up. And here's the thing. The doctors and nurses who pushed them away when they first started this program have now pulled them in and said, would you train us in how you do your work? Believe it. Can you believe it? Is there any doctors in this room? Any nurses? Good, I can say that whatever the hell I want. Think about it, just two ordinary women. It just goes to show the innate capabilities we have in our communities that are so invisible to us and so untapped. And think of the hope and promise they created by stepping forward and doing this work. Last example, I just want to share with you. I could go on for hours, you don't have that much time. Newtown, Connecticut, just right up the road, 2012. I got a call from the first selectman, essentially the chief executive officer of Newtown, just a handful of weeks after the massacre. Right? Adam Lanza walked in, Sandy Hook Elementary School, gunned down 20 first graders and 6 adults. Just 5 or 6 weeks after that, I got this call saying, would I come to Newtown and help that community move forward? First, I said no. I didn't think I was up to the task. And then I realized that this is my obligation to do this, my responsibility. And so I said yes. When I went there, most people, as many of you know, didn't believe that the community should even be talking about what to do with the school building or how to move forward. It was way too soon. It's just weeks after the massacre. Pat Lodra, the first select person, had set up a task force. The task force was made up of 24 elected officials from 4 different governing boards. They didn't agree with one another. What a lot of them agreed was I shouldn't be there. So I was fairly unwelcomed when I showed up. We met over and over again to figure out what should we do with the school building, which was essentially a crime scene. And we heard from families of victims. We heard from teachers. We heard from kids who went to the school. We heard from just about everyone in the community. And as we were moving through this process, every meeting was in public. It looked as though we were getting closer to make a decision about what to do. And then all of a sudden, one morning, I got a phone call right before I flew up to Hartford and then drove a bit to Newtown. I got a call that there was a front page article in the Wall Street Journal that said 30 teachers from Sandy Hook Elementary School had released a public letter saying that under no conditions would they go back to that school. And so I flew up that day and Pat and I met, and we decided that we would clear the room of hundreds of people who thought we were going to make a decision that night. And CNN and the Wall Street Journal and USA Today and every major media outlet in the country had been following all the deliberations since we began. And we went into a room and heard these 30 teachers tell their harrowing stories, which I won't recount here tonight. And we came out and it looked as though the process was going to fall apart. And so I stood up and said, we're not going to make a decision tonight. We're not quite sure what to do. But here's what I want you to think about moving forward, and we'll come back in a couple of weeks and see what we can do. No sooner than I got home the next morning that my phone started to ring off the hook, and it was the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and CNN and USA Today saying, we told you, Rich, this could never work. We told you this community could never come together. We told you there was too much despair here. There was too much division, too much disagreement. You can see it on the task force. They can't even agree on what to do moving forward. Heck, most people in this community can't even agree whether or not they ought to be having this conversation. We told you it wouldn't work. So we went back up 2 weeks later, and after a 3-hour meeting that ended after midnight, they made a decision. It was unanimous. They found common ground. And for me, I know that the folks still in Newtown are hurting. I know that the sorrow and the despair that those families feel and that community feels doesn't disappear. It sticks with us. But what the Newtown story taught me, much like my work in Flint, Michigan and Youngstown, Ohio and Mississippi Delta, is that we can move in this country from trauma and despair to healing and hope. We can do it if we set our minds to it. We can do it if we're brave enough. We can do it if we have enough humility. We can do it if we reach out to one another, even those we disagree with and we know we disagree with, to find some modicum of common ground that we can build on. But here's the thing. In order for us to do this, we have to change how we work. You still with me here? We have to change how we work. I have a saying that how we do the work is as important as what we do. How we do the work, and particularly now in this day and age where Americans feel the way they do, the way we do. How we engage with one another, how we do this work is as important as what we do. And so I just want to mention a few things that I think are really important. These are not the most complex ones that I work with every day, but these are really critical ones. And if we don't get these right, nothing else matters. One is that there are so many people in our society, and there are so many people here in Stamford, I would imagine, who don't feel heard. And the faster your community is growing, sometimes the more unheard we feel, the more invisible we feel, because we fear we're going to get left out and left behind. There are so many Americans who don't feel heard at all. Now, I could spend time talking to you about sophisticated civic engagement processes and how you do this, but I'd rather give you a really basic equation that I hope that you'll remember. When people don't feel heard, just think about this for yourself. When people don't feel heard, they don't feel as though their reality is understood. And when you don't feel your reality is understood, your dignity has been stripped from you. And when your dignity has been stripped from you, it's game over. So many Americans today feel as though their dignity has been stripped from them. And we talk a good game in this country about dignity. We all increasingly use that word. We all love to give speeches about it, write books about it, talk about it. But from where I'm sitting, it's mere lip service. If you're Black or brown or indigenous, it's lip service. If your town has lost a major factory and you have no place to go, it's lip service. If your town is growing and you're getting pushed out because you have no longer affordable housing, it's lip service. It's lip service. Dignity is non-negotiable. It is a birthright. It is not something we should be arguing about. It is not up for grabs. And if we want to get serious about how we do the work, if we want to get serious about making sure that Stamford is a community for everyone, then dignity has to be the place where we start. Don't start there, it's not worth moving forward. Second, we have so much negativity in the way we talk about things in our society today. It is drowning us out and pushing us under. We wonder why people don't want to engage. Who would want to engage in such negative conversations that we have? Think about it. When we engage people in this country, we ask them, what's their problem? When we ask them what's their problem, they give us a long laundry list. When they give us the list, they want to know why it hasn't been solved. When they want to know why it hasn't been solved, they want to know who's to blame. And then they want to cast aspersions, right? We end up in a toxic cul-de-sac that we can't get out of. And when we don't do that, we do these. Have you ever been involved in these visioning exercises with the little yellow dots? You ever been involved in those? You ever do those at the hospital? Good. We ask people, don't talk too much, just put the little yellow dot next to the thing you care about. And we come up with these utopian visions. But I ask you, do you know any single moms with 2 kids who are struggling where she's working 2 jobs, doesn't have adequate transportation to the job? Do you think she wants a utopian vision? She wants to know how her kids are going to get a good education tomorrow, how she's going to get to work, what she's going to do if she misses work because she gets sick and she doesn't have adequate health care or she can't afford her copay. Let's take an alternative. Instead of focusing on problems or utopian visions that aren't relevant to our lives, how about if we focus on our shared aspirations? Our shared aspirations. Think about it. Go home and try this tonight, or do it first thing in your job tomorrow. Ask someone about their aspirations for their community. What they will tell you is something from their gut that matters to them, that they want in their lives, that is actionable, doable, and achievable. When people talk about their shared aspirations and they hear each other talk about them, they realize that they're not alone. We're in this together. That while there is much that we disagree about in this country and in this community, there are some things we can agree on. When people talk about their shared aspirations, they create a common language, a public language, which creates shared meaning, which is the basis upon which we can move forward together. Because God knows we don't have enough shared language and shared meaning today. We've got to create it together. And so I think we ought to be talking more about what we're for, what we want to achieve in our lives, than getting hung up on talking about problems or getting stuck in utopian visions that take us nowhere. The other thing I think we need to do is, God knows we have a lot of things going on in our communities, but I think we need to learn how to build together again, how to do things together. I say this with all deference to the folks who work for the city government here or the library or other institutions who have worked for 4 mayors before. We need people to come together and work together and build together, not because that's going to solve all our challenges in our society, but because we're going to realize we have innate capabilities that we can step forward and act together, as the mayor was talking about earlier. We're going to find that when we hold a ladder for one another, we are creating shared humanity together. When we build something together, we realize that we actually have something to offer, no matter how much money we have in our wallet or what kind of car we drive or what kind of home we live in. We each have gifts and talents and resources to offer. When we build something together, we realize again that we have agency and power. I'm not talking about political power, I'm talking about human power. And that's in short supply today because everyone feels as though that power has been lifted from them and taken away. We need to create ways for people to come together in communities to build. In Reading, Pennsylvania, most of the solutions they came up with are going to require people in the community to step forward and do something together. And that's going to be a good thing. That's going to be a good thing. Just a couple other quick items. We have a lot of programs and services in communities, and we need them. We need them, right? A lot of education programs and services. But here's the thing. We don't have barely enough groups that bring us together across dividing lines, what I would call boundary spanning organizations. We are so fixated on our own programs, so fixated on our own services, sometimes with very good reason. But in so many of the communities that I work with, the challenge is we don't have ways to actually come together and actually collaborate together in real ways. Now, I know you have Strive here, and I hear it's working. And that's fantastic. And as successful as you are in Strive, It will be necessary, but not sufficient. It will be necessary, but not sufficient. We need more groups who can bring us together across dividing lines, who can bring us together to break us out of our silos, who can bring us together to reduce the fragmentation in our communities. And when we get together, let's not have those same conversations we always have about how we're going to collaborate together and use these $5 words to write grant proposals to the community foundation and other places when we know damn well we're not going to collaborate at all. We're just doing it and saying it to get money. I'm telling the truth. I'm telling the truth. In so many communities, particularly growth communities like Lexington, Kentucky and Clarksville, Tennessee, their challenge is they bring people together. They just don't have the hard conversations. They bring people together. They don't integrate their work together. They bring people together, but they're all fighting for credit and not figuring out how they can lift each other up. So if we really want to move forward, we've got to invest in more organizations and groups that can span boundaries and catalyze actions and then get out of the way. It's one of the most important investments we can make. So let me just close with this. I promise you, I'm not naive about change. I've been doing this for over 35 years now. I know I only look 29. And it's true, I am 29. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've had as many failures as successes. And I've come to the belief right now that the change that we need, the reason why I wanted to come here is because the change we need has to start in communities. It's in communities that we can see each other and hear one another. It's in communities that we can turn outward toward one another. It's in communities that we can restore our sense of dignity with one another. It's in communities that we can build together and actually see what we're building and touch it and feel it and kick it to make sure it's real and not just a figment of our imagination or what some politician in some faraway place said. We've got to start here. And the reason why I'm here is we need more communities like Stamford, Connecticut, that want to demonstrate that it's possible to create change in this day and age, in this country at this time. And then as we move forward, let's find those national leaders and state leaders who are willing and brave enough to step forward with us to engage in a different kind of way. Let's be on the lookout for them. Let's be good scouts about them. Unless you believe that this is a pipe dream, just remember American history. Our country was founded on so many flaws and so many mistakes and so many sins and so many stains. And yet, unlike other countries, we kept fighting. We kept fighting. We abolished slavery. Too late, but we did it. We ensured women's suffrage. Too late, but we did it. We ensured child welfare laws. Too late, but we did it. We ensured voting rights and civil rights. Way too late, but we did it. We are fighting today, again, to ensure that we can eradicate systemic racism. Way too late, but we still need to keep fighting. The thing I love about this country is that we have fight in ourselves and that we believe that we can become a more perfect union. Never perfect, but a more perfect union. That's what I'm fighting for. That's why I came here today. That's why I'm so glad to join with you. Thanks so much. Love to hear comments. I'm from New York. Originally, I love disagreements as long as they're civil. Thoughts? Yeah, go ahead. And then
We're from New York, also from Brooklyn. We enjoyed your comments, and I think you've hit a lot of nails on the head. Could you give us your thoughts on what I see as the lack of civic education? I teach graduate students, undergrads in New York, Westchester County. I mean, when I'm asked to teach an advanced course in public finance, I have to start teaching basic American government to college seniors and juniors and grad students. I remember when I was in high school, we had 3 units of what they used to call civic education. How would you address that?
You know, in Reading, so let me just give you some really concrete examples. In Reading, what people told us was, and this was mostly from people who didn't go to college, wouldn't have been part of the courses you're teaching now, said, you know, we are so stuck, and I've heard this in communities, we've done education work all across the country, but in Reading, this was the most recent example. People said to us, we have heard so much about these metrics that the schools need to hit. We have heard so much about preparing everyone for a job. Sure, we want that. Sure, there's all sorts of things that people want. But what we want first and foremost is that we're developing good human beings, that we're developing people who are members of a community, which is just another way of saying, to me, in part, civic education, right? If you expand that and start to open it up. I think, and I hate, I think as a nation, it started with a nation at risk back in the 80s, I believe. We have become so obsessed with the specialization in our education system that we have lost the notion, and I'm about to go talk to 60 college presidents in Minnesota and Iowa about this. We have lost our focus that what are we doing here? What is our purpose here? What are we seeking to create here? And I think if you answer those questions with any modicum of part of what we're doing here is a sense of shared humanity. Part of what we're doing here is we're reimagining and recreating ourselves and our communities and our country all the time. Part of what we're doing here is trying to build better lives for everyone. If you believe in any of that, then there's got to be some civic education. And we've got to get off this treadmill of specialization all the time which is at the expense of these larger concerns that I think we need to pay attention to while we're doing this other stuff. So
I've
But-
got one from Alice Knapp, from the Zoom. She wants to know, as we move forward, what is the role of local and/or public media?
critical. Did you say Alice asked that? I'm writing a piece right now on the reimagination of public libraries, the civic role of public libraries, and I would say it's very similar to the role of public media, if I can be so presumptuous as to say this. I think, so we've done a lot of work with public media across the country. Public media are, again, much like libraries, one of the last boundary spanning institutions and organizations we have in communities. Public media holds a public trust. Lyndon Johnson created it for very particular reasons, which still, I think, are relevant today. And what that requires, though, is for public media to become brave enough to step into communities and engage with people, to hear different voices, to illuminate issues from different perspectives, to stay at it over and over again. When I've worked with both public media and newspapers, we think of news as a one-day thing, and then because it's news, and then we go on. I think what people are looking for is coherence in their lives, not news. They're looking for how things fit together, for the meaning, for the sense of possibility in them. And I think public media is one of the best sources for that, so long as they engage the whole community, not just those who donate, not just those who they've seen as members. I hate the word members. I don't know how you can be members of a public trust. You're a resident. We're parts of community. There's some people who might support that financially, but membership connotes special things, special services, special rights. I think we all hold a right to public media. It's ours. So what I would say is that requires public media to engage in a much more, I want to say aggressive in a positive sense, aggressive sense, a much more upbeat sense, a much more confident sense about illuminating the issues that we need to face and engaging people around those. And I know some are doing that now, but much more needs to be done. And the last thing I'll say is, and I'd say this to any organization like public media, like public libraries, like education foundations, like community foundations, there is a vacuum in society right now And if you want to be relevant and significant and impactful in the life of communities, run into the void. Just make sure you're authentic, you're real, and that you have some courage and humility to come along with you. So.
Sure, thank you. I have a question in the same vein of engagement, and thank you for your commentary and time. What we're seeing is a huge sense of apathy, as you talked about, for folks whose systems just generally don't work for, you know? As much as I admire Mayor Simmons here, some people would say it doesn't matter if the mayor is Mayor Simmons or Mayor Martin or Mayor Pavia or Mayor Malloy. My life hasn't changed. I still have to take the city bus to work, and I still have to apply for free and reduced lunch for my kids. In your experience, how do you galvanize that person who's already said, no, this is not for me, never mind?
Thanks. That's a great question. So this came up a lot in Alamance County, North Carolina, which is in between the Research Triangle and Greensboro. And it's like a walk back in time in some cases. And so lots of folks said that, asked that question as well. Well, actually expressed what you were expressing, which is, why should I engage? Is anything going to change? I think, again, much like I was saying with public media, this is risky. So I think the question is, how safe do you want to be? What do you see your role as? And I think we have to calibrate risk. So I don't believe in just running headlong into situations. But first of all, I think we need to tell the truth, right? We need to tell the truth. Lots of people want reconciliation in this country about lots of things. Without telling the truth, reconciliation is useless. So I think we have to tell the truth. Let's use the example you just said, that a person has to take a bus to a job, that nothing has changed in their life, that their kids maybe still go to inadequate public schools, that there's crime on their streets. I think we need to say that straight out. Tell the truth. It's not a long speech. I just said it. Didn't take very long. And then I think we need to say it again and again and again. Then I think we need to pivot to what are the steps we can take now where we can start to deliver. I cut out of my talk because I felt like I was going too long. I wanted to talk about hope, because to me, ultimately, this is about hope. All of this is about hope. And hope, as you know, is, I've written 4 books on hope. Who cares? Because hope for an individual is whether tomorrow is going to be better than today. Whether or not there's even the prospect that tomorrow can be better than today. And hope is rooted in a track record, not rhetoric. So what I would say is, what are the things that we can start to peel off where we can actually demonstrate concretely that something has changed? And how can we illuminate those things so people can see them? And when we illuminate them, how can we do that without hyping them, overselling what they've created, or pretending that they've solved all the world's problems, because we all know they haven't. And then how do we put one step in front of the other and just keep moving while continuing to tell the truth of where we started? We do a lot of work on how you tell stories about change. And I think of them as parables, right? Like the Good Samaritan story, which has good, bad, and ugly in it, right? But a really good parable implicates you. It's about you. It's not about the Good Samaritan. It's really about each of us. And I think we need to learn how to tell stories about the work in ways that relate to people's lives, that they can see and hear themselves in them, and that they can believe what you're saying because we haven't overpromised at all. That's where I think we have to start. And unfortunately, that's not fast enough. It's not good enough. I think we have to say that too. We have to acknowledge it's not fast enough or good enough. It's not what any of us want, but it's what we got right now. So let's keep moving. And will you join me? And you may not join me the first time. You're probably not going to join me the second time. You may not join me the third time. The burden's on me to keep coming back and asking you, not on you. The burden's on me. And we've got to keep asking. No matter how many times you want to talk about authenticity, authenticity is getting this door slammed in your face and returning. That's authenticity. Not that someone wants to have a beer with you. we've got to be more authentic in our work together. So I hope that helps.
We've got one more from the Zoom. I can jump in.
I thought you said initially the zoo,
The Zoom.
and I was,
The Zoom from Turhan. How do you get people to talk together when they disagree?
first of all, you don't start with the disagreements, which is where we start today, right? How many times at Thanksgiving dinner? Oh, see, I touched a chord. You know, we just start with what we disagree with. Unfortunately, I don't know if this is true for public media here in Connecticut, I doubt it, but the media makes money off starting with where we disagree. Politicians gain votes by starting with where we disagree. Social media gains eyeballs by starting with where we disagree. The question I have is, who's the counterforce to that? Like, let's stop complaining about it and do something about it. Who's the counterforce? How do we build a counterforce to that? That's what I'm interested in. And part of that is enough of us has to step forward, whether we lead an organization or a city hall or a public media station or whatever it may be. And we have to do our part. And the conversation, I think, I'm going to repeat myself from before, has to start with our shared aspirations, because we all have them and we all have enough aspirations that we share where we're still going to disagree on a lot of stuff, and we can build off that. And we have a choice. We can either argue over all the things we disagree on, or we can figure out where we have some agreement and start to build together. And ultimately, we'll build the civic confidence and the capabilities and the capacities to deal with the harder issues. But if we insist on starting with those issues, we're going to be in this toxic cul-de-sac. It's just a fight. We're not going anywhere. That's unfortunate, but I think that's I want to deal with reality, not what I dream of only. So.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today. My question is about how can we in local government better communicate with residents and enhance civic engagement? And are there any innovative models that other cities have done that you've worked with to, increase civic participation and engagement, and just us as a city better deliver for residents and communicate with residents?
Yeah, so there are really good models out there. I can't speak to them fluently. But what I would say is that it has to be embodied. I think at the root of this is a culture challenge for local government. Because as you know, maybe even why you ran initially, I don't know, local government often has been like public schools, almost like a fortress. And the role has been to manage. I've done tons of research about how local officials manage the public, right? We put them behind microphones for 2 minutes. We only want to talk to certain people. We only go to certain places and hear people who agree with us. There's all sorts of ways that we manage the public. We bring decisions to them after they've been made and try to sell them to them. So I think that requires a shift, not just in technique, but in mindset about, are we actually turned outward toward our community? Do we believe the community has something of value? Do we understand that there are risks in engaging people right now, which there are many, as you know? There are real risks. So how do we mitigate those? Not run away from them, but mitigate them. And how do we make sure that this is an ethos within all leaders across the local government, not just with a single individual, as important as that is? And that, I think, is really critical. The other thing I would say is, I don't think you have to, there are lots of models out there about participatory budgeting, and also those are all great. And I have friends who do all that stuff. I don't, but I have friends who do all that stuff. But I think actually what people are looking for is something more basic. I think people are looking to the belief that you see and hear them, that they believe that what matters to them matters to you, and that when you don't agree with it, you'll say why. That you'll say we're going in another direction, or we have to go in another direction for some reason. I think people want to know that you're not going to, you and your staff, your leadership, don't just show up at election time, which I can't tell you how many times people keep saying that. I think they want to know that you'll stand in a space when it gets nasty. And that's hard, as you know. I think they want to know that you're telling us a narrative, that you're not just talking about programs, you're stringing together a story about what it is that we're really up to, what it is that we really value, how those values are being implemented every day, and why it's important. And I think, as you know, that's very difficult to maintain, but I think it's really critical because right now, people, as I said before, are confused, they're disoriented, and they're destabilized. I can't overemphasize this. I can't overemphasize the psychological elements to this. And as you said, they're isolated. So the answer to that is, yes, talking about success, but actually the answer to that is to speak and engage with people in a certain kind of way that reduces anxiety, that makes them feel part of something larger than themselves, that enables them to see that we're actually trying to move forward together amid our differences. And honestly, that's where I would, that's not a very concrete answer, but that's where I would, if I were sitting in your office and you had a whiteboard, I'd map it out for you more concretely. But those are the sensibilities I would start with. I know that's inadequate, but.
Sorry about that. This actually sort of is an example maybe of what Mayor Simmons was talking about. We have an opportunity. You mentioned shared aspirations, right? And building something together. The city of Stamford has just discovered in the last few weeks that we are going to get money from the state to rebuild our schools. So we're in the process of this big, huge thing. I've been involved. We've all been involved with the long-term facilities committee. And how do we, it's always like the same 40, 50 people. I mean, we have 130,000 people in Stamford, how, and you go to the neighborhoods, but, we want everyone to be involved. This is going to affect, I mean, my son just graduated, but it's going to affect, everyone else's kids. And I want our schools to be as the best that they can be. But how do we get everybody involved in that?
Yeah, we did a lot of work on school facilities with the Gates Foundation a number of years ago. And it was really important because the assumptions that the school district and other people were making about the facilities were not at all what people necessarily wanted in the community. And so there's another opportunity, right? So what I would say is first conceptualize it as, where do people believe they live as opposed to where are jurisdictions? Some of this is around schools, obviously, and feeder systems, but where do people consider their neighborhoods, not by the lines that have been drawn by someone, but their mental maps? And I would map that out on a whiteboard and say, okay, at the very least, we need to make sure we're touching all these different places, which are about people's mental maps, not our jurisdictions, because that's where people live their lives. That's where their lived experiences are gotten. Beyond that, I think, you want to go beyond that and make sure that people have the opportunity to engage. Now, the harder thing, so that's hard because people tend not to want to do that, and they overprocess people, and it becomes like a civic engagement process as opposed to hearing people and understanding what matters to them. So that's one part. You've got to go where people are. That's going to require forming partnerships with people who have credibility and relationships in those communities. There's no replacement for that. I think that's a great opportunity because we need allies. I don't mean political allies. I mean community allies, right? That's number one. Number two, I think we have to change the questions we ask. So I can send you stuff on this. You can just take some of our stuff and use it if it's helpful. But we've got to change. It can't be about the facility first and foremost. It's about who are we and what do we value and what kind of community do we want and what kinds of schools facilities we want that reflect those values. That leads us to a different place. And it also creates the kind of connections and bonds and belonging that are really important. So again, going back to the mayor's question, if I were part of the school facilities thing, I would be taking what we learned. There's an old country song, the refrain of which is, I can't see me in your eyes anymore. This is the most technical thing I can say to you today. I can't see me in your eyes anymore. And what we all want is to be seen and heard. And that's why people are going to these hate groups and these other places and fight, because they're validated. They're accepted, right? So when you're doing these conversations, how are you taking what you've learned, theming it, not turning it into like one of these fancy reports, theming it in a way that people can understand and reflecting it back to the community as a story about what we value, about who we seek to become. I would go on the road with that. I would enlist people in telling that. It would become like a new song or a new hymn of Stanford, so that people can see and hear themselves and start to feel part of something larger than themselves, even amid the disagreements. That's really critical as well. So, and then you got to deliver on these school buildings, right? In Alamance County, they went through a process, not like this, but through a process, and folks, particularly people of Black folks, and now some Latinos, felt as though all the things that were promised for their neighborhoods never materialized. Materialized for the white community, but didn't materialize for their community. So what kind of ways are we going to create up front that ensure we deliver on the promises we made to people? I think that's really important. So I hope that helps. And I'm happy to send you some materials.
There's one more from the Zoom back here. Denise wants to know, how do you define truth?
I don't know. How do you define love? How do you define liberty? Well, there are some things that are facts, like the world is round. Water is made up of certain properties. To the best of our knowledge, our truth is that certain vaccines work for certain diseases or things. So I think there's some facts. The problem is that we're now in a world where no one believes anything, and where we've conflated things that might be based, for instance, on science to the best of our ability. Even in science, nothing's a closed deal, right? So I don't know if there's anything that's absolute truth. There are things that are closer, moving towards the truth as best we know at any given time, right? And we have to decide as a society, will we value those? Beyond that, though, I think we have to separate in some cases and realize that there are values debates undergirding some things that aren't really about the truth. They're about what we value, what we hold to be valuable. I don't mean like cultural values. I mean, what we hold to be valuable. And there we can have disagreements, right? And I think the question is, can we live with those disagreements? And can we sort them out as best we can? Can public media illuminate them in some cases? Because I think that's a perfect role for public media. And can we find ways to work through those? Right now, we've lost any belief in anything moving towards the truth. And we've heightened the noise and the fear around those things, those debates about what we hold to be valuable. And again, this is where I think we need more groups that run into the public square and say, we've got to engage in a fundamentally different way and have the bravery to do that. Otherwise, everyone's going to keep weaponizing their agendas, and it's going to happen in local communities. And then we're really going to be in trouble. And that's the future unless we act. Couple more.
Many of these disagreements seem to be more on the national level. For example, who won the 2020 election? Talk about truth. To some people, truth is that Biden won. The other truth is that Trump won. And each camp sincerely believes what they believe, and you can't sway them. Just one more little story. It goes to local governments. When we bought a house upstate New York, I was on the dirt road that was a mile off the main road. And I used to tell people it's more important to me who the highway superintendent was than the president of the United States. So I just illustrate that to say that our local government can go a long way to bridge these differences because people could see that they're in this together. Whereas on a higher level, national level, it's not as easy to see.
Yeah, two really quick points. One is I couldn't agree with you more that it's on the local level that we need to begin. You know, Reading is Exhibit A. I'm sure you have others here. We can agree on things under the right conditions. So that's one. Second, about Trump or Biden or whatever we want to argue over about national elections. I think as hard as it can be sometimes, and I know it's difficult, we have to determine whether or not we're willing. Let's just take folks who voted for former President Trump. I know there are people on the fringes and at the extremes that want to insist that 2020 was a steal. And they believe it. And they believe it. But there are many more people who say that, who may or may not believe it, but want to say something. Well, it may be worse, or it may be that if you live in West Virginia, where I've done a lot of work, and your coal plant has closed, and going back to the question before, and we have made so many promises to coal country about how we're going to help revitalize those communities, and all they've faced is opioid and meth crises that were pushed on them by some certain companies. I mean, they have to take some responsibility, but it was pushed on them. When we have abandoned those communities, when we have sold them the dream that every coal miner is now going to work with wind energy, which is a falsehood, then I think we have to say, what does it mean to actually see and hear people who live in West Virginia who are struggling? That's what I want to know. That's what I don't like, you know, the steel stuff. I don't like some of the stuff on the left either, because it corners people in a different kind of way sometimes. But I think the question is, how do we get folks who are willing, you know, and all, this is the last thing I'll say about this. All change that I've studied starts small and grows. Look at almost every change process, it's typically that. Science, the American Revolution, women's suffrage, over and over and over again, it happens. So instead of us thinking that somehow, as you're not suggesting, but somehow we're going to change the national scene, what I would say is, how can we get started where we live, start to make this happen, and start to spread it like a positive contagion in the country? That's our task. But that's going to require we reach out to people who we vehemently disagree with, or we think we do, who are peddling stuff we don't like to hear, and ask them what are their aspirations for their lives and their community. And let's start there and see where we can go. All right. One more.
One last thing, if there are no other questions for Rich, I wonder if you might take a moment. We do have books of yours for sale to tell us a little bit about what we could expect in reading them, how they differ, and what's important to know about them.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, wow. Can you come work in the, you can work remotely actually. Stepping Forward is a book about a lot of things I've talked about today, which is how is it that we step forward and engage with one another and start to think about notions of shared humanity in a different kind of way and put ourselves on a different track. So it's got lots of stories in it from different places I've worked, including other countries. Unleashed is actually a book about change. And it's based on a 30-year impact study we did at the Institute, looking at 9 communities that we wanted to see in using our work, how did they create change, particularly after they were no longer working directly with us. And so what we discovered in that work is that all the change started small. It grew in unexpected ways with unexpected partners. And it spread like a chain reaction in a community that kept growing so long as you're intentional, opportunistic, and open to serendipity. You need to do all three. And that you can address fault lines and create a different kind of civic culture when you do that. So that's what the Orange Book's about. So thanks for asking. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be with you.